Okay, so I was thinking I would tell this story in class coming up soon, but we are kind of pressed for time in class, so I thought, well, I'm just going to make a video instead and talk about this, and then I'll put it on my YouTube channel because this is something very important for software developers. This story explains something, and it's a thing very important for programming that we don't have time to go over in a class because it's an experience-based thing. So I thought I'd tell you the story of this. In Python class that right now where this showed back up, we're covering the TK interface package, very common one. And one of the things I like to express is the conventional appearance, make sure that that's important. Those are in other videos. So I'll kind of set up that conventional appearance with the main menu up top, and a file menu, an edit menu, maybe a view menu, get a status bar down at the bottom, some sort of toolbar with a bunch of buttons in it right below the main menu, and the primary I/O area on the GUI. That's straightforward. So this was a few years ago after I'd finished computer classes and engineering classes at a community college, and then moved on to a 4-year degree and was just starting to pursue the 4-year degree in mathematics. And I thought, well, maybe if I can release some software, make a few bucks on that, it would help pay for the college. So I was making some stuff, and Python's a nice language to work in. This was 2015, so a lot of computers, that speed issue that Python had back in 1995 wasn't as much of an issue anymore. So I went with the easy, make it in Python. And it was all working. I had this big piece of software, spent a lot of time on, thousands of lines of code. It did everything it was supposed to do, except for one slight issue. And one of those menu drop downs, main menu, it needed to call one of the big important functions of the software that obviously one of the buttons did, and several options along with right clicks in the primary area all did that. That was related to this, but I found other ways to get that. But that method needed some parameters filled. I had to pass arguments, which that's fine for the buttons. Right? We create a TK button. Right? BTN is the TK dot button. I'm assuming everybody who's seen this video is familiar with that stuff. Where's it going? We stick it on our GUI. Put an image on there. Image, colors, all that other stuff. And then finally at the end, we do command equals something, equals the name of the method, and we can pass that in as long as there's no arguments. If there's some arguments, that's kind of a problem. Bindings work a little bit better. We do a binding and then do a lambda in event and pass that lambda in, but we can also do that with the command attribute in a button with no problem. Well, I'll switch to the binding. So in the TK button, we can just bind that. btn.bind, give it our event. One, and then instead of just calling the method directly, we can do the lambda, wait on that event, and then pass it into our method with the other arguments that are the other args. But if we're trying to bind stuff to the main menu, that's a problem. Things won't bind there. So we need to use that command attribute. And so bypassing the bindings, I'll just write menu add command. So this is already one of the sub menus. This gets put in one of the cascades. All those first parts, and then finally at the end, we can say command equals, and we hit a problem because arguments need to be passed. So if we put the method name in there, I'll just write M. When we put parentheses, that's going to run when the GUI shows up on the page. So once again, we have to use Lambda. But if we try to wait for the event, we get an error. A little bit of trial and error will hopefully quickly lead to thinking, well, maybe if we just put Lambda and tell that method that the event is none. Just leave that working, and then we can pass in the args afterwards. That worked. Okay, it's like, okay. On the menu, I just have to say there's not an event. Something else is happening. Don't know why. Then I thought about that and thought about it. It was all working, test after test after test after test, still worked fine there. But it bothered me because I did not know why that was happening. Like, I'm clicking here. Why is there not an event? I went back and thought about what an event is, the whole process. So the user always gets priority. The term we use is interrupt. The user can interrupt any other piece of software. To a certain extent, we can't interrupt an infinite loop because the computer is going to finish the current instruction and then stop and do whatever the user needs done immediately. So if there's like an accidental infinite loop, that's why we have to actually crash the program to stop it, because the computer can't. The computer has to finish that instruction, which is repeat until some point before it can stop and handle that interrupt. And then when we interrupt something, so like a hardware interrupt, a click on a mouse or a keyboard press, something happened on the hardware that was sent to the operating system. And the operating system paused what it was doing and said, oh, the user wants something done. So it takes the details of that, like which key was pressed, the timestamp when it happened, if it's a mouse click, where was that mouse click at? And it passes all of that information onto the thing that has focus, the software that is currently running. It's like, okay, the user just did this. So maybe with XE on one of these buttons, okay, the user just clicked at this XY coordinate at this particular timestamp. So the current software running, the language that's running, so in Python, the Python interpreter, looks and says, okay, that timestamp, those XY coordinates corresponded to this button, which has a binding. Oh, that information just got from the operating system. That must be the event I was waiting on. So then it runs that method. I thought and thought, and that still wasn't explaining why the event was different here. I couldn't figure it out. And then went to learn the language R. It's a popular language for statistical based things, for working in statistics and analyzing large sets of data. Whenever I was learning that, the error messages were weird. So when I was learning R, the error messages would say error and then spit out a bunch of binary code, which is obviously not very helpful, right? I couldn't look at it and be like, oh, there's the problem, that 73rd bit should be a 1, but it's a 0, right? That wasn't happening. So whenever I used to just, when R spit out a bunch of binary codes, like, oh, something went wrong, and going back and just checking the software to figure out what went wrong. R also is pretty much comes with the TK interface package. Tickle, TCL. I always like to spell that out because we pronounce it tickle, but if I said that word, you probably wouldn't know what, have any clue what to go search for. We have to bring that in manually. That's like a extra library. So we have to bring tickle in, and then we can do the TK stuff. So I was like, oh, I know TK very well. I've already built a few pieces of software with it, trying to help pay for college. So I started doing what I was familiar with. Got down here, and I was like, oh, well, I know what to do with this. Don't use pack on the main menu or grid. Have to actually do the menu the GUI .config, and then tell the computer I want to configure this main menu. And so I did all that, did the steps and the syntax for R, but the logic the same as what I was quite familiar with in Python. But I made a typo on the method name. And so obviously a typo is going to spit back an error message. I was working in R. I was used to error messages that came back as binary code. But that typo gave me a human readable error message. And at that point, I finally understood exactly why that didn't work. I understood why I couldn't pass an event header. I knew the workaround. That was just a quick trial and error to figure that. I didn't know why that was the workaround. Why couldn't I wait on the event? Why did it just arbitrarily wait? And then even trying to create an event here, right? We can manually type the Python code or the R code to create an event, but it would crash the same as if we tried to wait on an event or other things. It didn't make any difference. But when R, which always gave error messages in binary code, encountered that typo, the error message came back in human readable text. And I knew exactly what happened. I think I just went over all the pieces. Pause this video and see if you can think through why that failed. Remember, to do a menu, I'm assuming this is GUI is the TK object, right? GUI equals that TK object. So then when we need a menu, we say GUI .config. And then pass in the menu, which is different than the pack or the grid or place. I don't ever use place, but that's all the pieces. I've talked about all the pieces needed I used to solve that problem. This stretched out over nine and a half months. This was quite a while. So this was the original problem, and the workaround happened mid-fall. This happened the following July. So I kept thinking about that problem for a while, but if you haven't done so, pause the video, see if you can think about why. And the reason, so now the reason why is this config. We weren't loading something into the GUI like we do with pack. Right? Pack just says, put that on this GUI. Config relates back to the operating system. And I just went over the steps of what an event is. A software interrupt, like a certain time on the clock is hit, and so software interrupts whatever's happening. And the computer processes that and sends information back to the software that currently has focus and says this event happened. Or hardware interrupt, the user hits a button on the keyboard, clicks a mouse, and the computer pauses what it's doing, gathers all that information. The operating system pauses what it's doing, gathers all that information, and sends it to the thing that currently has focus. Like the TK interface based GUI, so that it knows where a click happened or what key press was happening. But this config thing, or really it was that human readable error message. If that information about clicking that menu item would have been processed. The interrupt gets processed as an event and then passed back, but R would have given me an error message in binary code. So when I click that button, the interrupt happened, and then the interrupt through the message, through the error message, not the GUI. So that's when I knew why the thing happened. The menu was configured, which relates to the native properties of the TK interface package. It has to relate to the operating system. That way it looks right on a Mac, or it looks right on the Windows, or it looks right on an Ubuntu system. The menu has to be configured to the operating system. So it's not there is no event. The menu happens directly from the interrupt, not from the event. So that's why if you need to pass in some parameters, it has to be none, because there is no event to pass in. You have the interrupt itself. So in the case of a click, you have the hardware interrupt itself, not the event that hardware interrupt initialized. And that stretches out, right? Late fall to mid-July, that's a long time. That's not the sort of problem we're gonna solve in the time constraints of a classroom, which is very important for the software development industry as well, because that's why whenever you go to apply for jobs, you'll see that requirement over and over and over again. 3 years experience required, 5 years experience required, 10 years experience required, because they assume that in that amount of time, you will have encountered those problems, the things that take a long, long time to think through, and that that you can't just go research the answer. A unique problem, maybe I should say it that way. The thing, because I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find any answers about that. That's why I had to figure it out myself. But those sort of problems, we can't really fit in the time constraints of a classroom. Right? We might need an entire class just to deal with one of those problems, because there's nothing except thinking about that problem, because the research isn't going to handle that. And furthermore, to put that in a classroom, well, I just called it a unique problem. It kind of happens when you're the first person to encounter the problem, or if other people have encountered it and solved it, they didn't go write a blog about it. They just released their software and moved on, took a lesson from it. So most of what happens in a classroom is prepared things that we know you'll have the solution for, that you can kind of go through quickly and fit in a weekly homework assignment or a semester-long project. So problematic things that can be difficult, but still fit in that time constraint. And as a result, a lot of that can also be found online, right? We can jump on Google and search for the results, which means people can Google their way to a software development degree without problem. But learning how to Google your way to a software development degree does not prepare you to deal with problems like that one I just described there, and figuring out why that happened. Yeah, granted, it didn't take me long to come up with the workaround, but I wanted to know why that was the workaround, not just that it worked. And that took a whole lot longer. And that's what they're looking for when those job postings say 3 to 5 years of experience or something. They want you to have encountered some of those problems and solved it. It's a way to, I guess, make sure the people in the industry are capable of solving problems, not just looking up an answer. Because software development or programming in general is about solving problems. And in our modern world, things that fit in the time constraints of a classroom, most of those problems, you can just go look up the answer and not necessarily think through a solution. So I wanted to tell that story of how I knew that would work. We talked about it in class, and I just rattled off the answer, and then some questions came back about it. So I thought I'd tell that story because it's very relevant. sometimes the problems take a long time to figure out why it didn't work. And that's because the GUI, the menu, is handled by the operating system, and there is no event on the main menu in TK. It is directly from the interrupt. And yeah, so it took 9.5 months and a typo sort of coincidence to figure out why that was the solution. So I thought telling that story would be relevant to software development and the industry in general, because that's why there's always that requirement of experience. So they figure in 3 to 5 years of programming, you will have encountered an issue that you weren't able to just go look up and had to actually come up with a solution manually for it. So a way to confirm that all the programmers they hire can do that. So thought that story was relevant and was going to tell it in class, but I think then I decided, oh, that's going to take up a lot of time. We got a bunch of stuff to cover. So I'll just make a video and be like, please watch this video. So thank you all. I'll see you soon.